These two came about at the same time, a Thunderbolt and an F-16. Then you have the stealth bomber and some stealth fighters. These would have come before these guys. If you're familiar with the shapes already, it's not hard to line them up. And that's how evolutionists are. They are familiar with the shapes they're looking for. Now, let's look at some, and what they're continually doing is looking for that missing link, something that is ape-like and human-like. That's the missing link in development from the apes or the monkeys or the chimps, that common ancestor, to us. They're constantly looking for it. And every time they think they find it, they find egg on their face as a result. Kind of like Ziggy here, who's got plumbing problems in his house. Oh, thank goodness, our home is saved. The plumbers are finally here. Who's the plumbers? Yeah. It looks like they found them, like Ziggy's got the missing link, but things are about to get a lot worse for him. And that happens virtually every time they find something that they claim is a missing link. Now, here's one of the first fossils I want to look at, Java Man. This was found by Eugene Dubois in 1891. He found a skull cap and a femur about a year later in the same location, in a place in Java. Everybody remembers Krakatoa east of Java, so this was a little bit off the beaten track. But many experts say that the skull cap he found was the skull cap of a gibbon, and that people who examined the femur claimed it was indeed a legitimate Homo sapien fossil. This is what they wanted to find, so it was originally fairly well received as a monkeys to man discovery. In the same strata, not too far from each other, but found a year apart, was a skull cap that had monkey-like qualities and a femur that had human-like qualities. So is this the missing link? Except later on, somebody else did some excavation in the area and found evidence of fire and a human molar in the same area. That kind of debunks the idea of human evolution. When deeper down in the strata you find a human molar, as well as evidence of fire. So Java Man kind of disappeared. Again, you know, Ziggy saw the Three Stooges coming and thought that he was saved. Now, Piltdown Man is the next one I want to look at. And Solly Zuckerman's one of my favorite paleoanthropologists. If you haven't read any of his stuff, you should. And in my notes, I have a quote from him. In addition to this one, where he said that you could take all the evidence to support human evolution and put it on the top of a pool table and not interfere with the game. Okay? Solly Zuckerman is an evolutionist and a paleoanthropologist, and that's what he said. He also said this: as I have already implied, students of fossil primates have not been distinguished for caution when working within the logical constraints of their subject. The record is so astonishing that it is legitimate to ask whether much science is yet to be found in the field at all. The story of the Piltdown Man hoax provides a pretty good answer. I love the Piltdown Man. This guy is cool. Pithecanthropus, Homo erectus, 1.5 million years old. This would have been one of the guys that's discovered fire and started cooking his meat before he ate it, which I think was a great discovery myself. Discovered by Charles Dawson in a gravel pit about 20 miles outside of downtown London. In 1912. Actually, from 1908 to 1915, he found these fossils. The issue here is it was exposed as a fraud in 1953. Science uses this. Initially, they were very embarrassed by the fraud. But science uses this to show how wonderfully self-correcting science is. In my opinion, it shows how wonderfully self-fulfilling science is and how slow they are to self-correct. Because what this guy found was skull fragments, and a few months later, a couple of teeth, and a jaw fragment, and then more skull pieces. And the skull was very human-like. The jaw was very primitive. And over the 40 years or so before it was exposed as a fraud, there were some 500 doctoral dissertations written supporting this thing as being a wonderful monkeys-to-man missing link. But what was discovered in 1953 is that the teeth of the jaw, had been purposely filed down and was stained with potassium chromate to make it look old. Okay? And that the fossils that were on display that those PhD people were doing their dissertations on were casts of the original, not the originals. And that's the crux, and that's what we're going to get to in a few minutes on another example. It's very difficult to see these original fossils on any of these finds. So, This thing was exposed in in an article in Nature, which is the British equivalent of our Science magazine in 1982. It was confirmed to be an orangutan jaw, of all things. Who did this fraud? Who committed it? The scientists pat themselves on the back that it took them only 40 years to uncover the fraud. So now the detective work goes on. Who did it? Who are they trying to blame this fraud on? Was it people at the British Museum? Did they do it in connection with Charles Dawson? There's another guy named Teilhard de Harden. Have anybody read any history on World War I? No? You remember Teilhard de Harden, Roman Catholic priest? How do you pronounce it? Deschardin. Deschardin. I'm probably butchering a lot of these names because a lot of them I've never heard pronounced. But Deschardin basically lived throughout World War I in the trenches in France. And he went out into no man's land between the German lines and the French lines and routinely pulled people out of the middle of the battle into the trenches. And he never was wounded or scratched once, even though people that were helping him were routinely slaughtered during the war. Deschardin. That guy survived, okay? And he became a very big proponent in the church of evolution, at least in the visible church. Sometimes you wonder why certain people die and others don't. Well, Chardin went on to do a lot of damage. But he was involved in this process. In fact, he was one of the ones that found one of the teeth that helped support this idea of monkeys to human evolution. He was just sitting on a bench and looked down and says, "Oh, look what I found. Here's a human tooth." It's an interesting little story. But they tried to figure out who did this fraud, who perpetrated it. And in this book, Introduction to Physical Anthropology, 6th edition, by Germain and Nelson, you know who they blame? Who they give most of the blame to? Sir Arthur Conan Doyle. Who is he? Sherlock Holmes. He's the guy that wrote the Sherlock Holmes stuff. He was a medical doctor. He lived not too far from the pit where the fossils were found. And what the literature doesn't tell you when you read the professional stuff on Piltdown Man is that they also found elephant fossils, mastodon fossils, rhino fossils, hippopotamus fossils, and an elephant femur that looks for all the world like someone had worked it, chiseled it into a cricket bat. Okay? And you all know what cricket is. That's the game you play if you're not able to hit a curveball. Okay? So why did they buy into this? Because it's